Today I'm going to try to draw this row of pillars in Tbilisi, Georgia, and I pretty much hate every second of it. um, there's so much about this drawing and this reference and this day that have not been creatively conducive. And we'll talk about it. But first, if you're new here, this is part of the process. I'm learning how to draw while traveling the world, and every now and then, it's just a huge pain in the neck. And I'll start by saying this. Today's reference wasn't my first choice. Not because it doesn't make for a good one. There are plenty of little interesting things about it. It's beautiful. But it was the last thing that I saw after a long stretch of searching. I'd thrown in the towel multiple times before sitting down to draw this, but stubbornly, I kept walking around trying to find something that might work. I think it was probably a combination of things that made this so difficult, but surprisingly, I don't think pickiness had a part to play as it usually does. I was pretty open to drawing whatever today, but time after time, thing after thing, there was some annoying issue that I couldn't circumvent. Part of that comes from being in a new city, for drawing that is, where a lot of my time at this stage is going to getting my bearings and resetting my expectations. So for example, in Tallinn, not only had I been there a number of times in the past, but that city, even with all the towers and tourists, it still makes room for these wide open spaces that make drawing so comfortable. Everyone has room to breathe for the most part. And here, not that there aren't wide open spaces. If anything, this right here is an example of one. But it's that relative to the size of the city, it doesn't feel that way. So the ratio is a lot different. For every area that's nice and quiet like this one, there are 50 that aren't. And that probably sounds silly. It's obviously not that straightforward. But while walking around this general area, it felt impossible to find a similar level of peace to that of Tallinn, just as an example. Again, that's not entirely true. There are just many areas here that aren't necessarily optimal for sitting down for like 15 or so minutes to draw. They might be nice to walk around. I actually love walking around here, but for drawing, it's definitely a different thing. So to combat that, I think the best course of action for me right now is to either leave my apartment with a crystal clear idea of what I plan to draw on a given day, like down to the angle of the subject or the perspective of the scene, or have some broader areas in mind that are a bit more out of the way or known to be less bustling, I suppose. And it's really not even that. Tbilisi does have a lot of energy, but turn off of any street and it won't be long before you find some quiet. It's just that there aren't always places to stop and sit, even in those quieter areas. And then when there are, I've found little to draw. So yeah, I'm currently just working it out, going through more of a discovery stage, trying not to let it get to me, but candidly, it very much did today. It definitely got to me. And that leads me to something I've known for a long time. But every time I experience it, it's like I have to relearn it all over again. And that's just how heavily creativity relies on one's mood, or at least how much it relies on my mood. Having spent over an hour looking for, this elusive combination of something and somewhere to draw, the time crunch starts to feel more and more pressing. And all of that anticipation and honestly aggravation is just building up in the background. If I gave up for the day, accepted that I wasn't going to find what I was looking for, that is something of an exhale. But when I keep pushing, even if I happen upon something I would normally find enjoyable to draw, like this, I won't experience those same feelings because of all of that built up frustration. So in some cases, the smarter move for me would be to accept the failure and move on, just come back tomorrow. That's easier said than done, of course, but sometimes that's what it takes. or else I run the risk of being in such a mood that ultimately negatively affects the creative process anyway. So that's exactly what I went through today. And as is usually the case with times like this, the drawing itself was equally as disappointing. I really disliked this one on every level. Typically, I'll come around after a few hours, sometimes a few days. I'll separate myself from the process and find that I can reevaluate the drawings with more objectivity. But that has not been the case for this one. I actually drew this a few days ago, so I have had time to sit with it. I've completely disconnected myself from the aggravation of that day, and I still see this as one of my worst drawings. And that's going to happen every once in a while. And if anything, it confirms my need to learn when to call it a day. I'm used to this weird, non-linear process of learning. I've taken the 2 steps forward, 1 step back numerous times by now. But there's a marked difference, in my opinion, between simply disliking the product and disliking the process. Today's drawing exemplifies the latter, and I don't think it's such a good idea and should be, for me, avoided at all costs. I've disliked plenty of my drawings, maybe most of them, but I've only disliked the process 2 or 3 times, and those negative examples stick with me for a lot longer than the positive ones. Okay, that part of the video is done. So let's talk a tiny bit about some of the choices that I made in this drawing that I feel participated in its mediocrity. So you may have noticed, if you're paying attention and you haven't clicked off by now, that throughout this drawing, rather than build out an entire piece, like one thing at a time, take a pillar, for instance, rather than build out an entire pillar, I would draw one line for, let's say, the pillar on the left, and then the same line for the pillar in the middle, and again for the pillar on the right. And I would use this method for nearly every mark that I made. So when I say that, I don't mean I made a vertical line for the pillar and a vertical line for another pillar. I mean every last detail. If you go back, or even still, you might notice that, even a small horizontal line that's meant to be a small detail or a shadow or something like that, I don't round out the entirety of that part of that pillar. I make that one mark and I go to the next pillar and make the same exact mark. My thinking was that by equally distributing the details, my chances of crafting 3 hopefully nearly identical pillars would be high. And no, that was not the case. And if anything, the opposite is true. This back and forth approach made it considerably more difficult to keep track of where I was in the reference, because when I would make a line on the left, to make the same line twice more, I wouldn't need to re-observe the reference. I would need to just copy what I'd already done. That meant I was spending a lot more time, 3 times as much, looking down at the paper. And when I'd look back up, I need to shift back over to the left or whatever side I was referencing and sort of recalibrate. Also, I would over-exaggerate those smaller details. I became so conscious of just one thing at a time, I would prioritize that in my mind, kind of forgetting the rest of that particular part of the reference. So I would remember one of those horizontal lines or a shadow or whatever, and place it on the middle and then right pillar. And that's all I was thinking about. I wasn't thinking about the rest of the scene, and I certainly wasn't thinking about the next detail because I hadn't observed it yet. Therefore, I also had no flow. So each piece of the drawing felt separate from its surroundings, even if it was part of the same construction. So by the end, it all ends up feeling disjointed and, to me, visually unpleasant. For now, here it is. Take a good look. You know my feelings, so let me know yours. Leave a comment, and even though this wasn't the most exciting drawing ever, this is part of the learning process, like I said in the beginning. So if you found that at all valuable or insightful, go ahead and like the video. Okay, I need to stop looking at this now. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.